Y'all, it's David Ducker coming back at you, and today we're going to be doing a re-review for GURPS 3rd edition. It's the revised edition. They're 3.5, if you will. I've previously done a review of GURPS 3rd edition, but I've got more experience, more tenure with it now, so I thought I would do a re-review for anything that I missed, anything that I've learned since then, a more accurate and apt review of the product in my hand. So we'll go through it chapter by chapter. Chapter 1, Basic Attributes. So GURPS, very simple on the attributes. They have 4: strength, health, dexterity, and intelligence. That's it. It's a skill-based, point-by style rule set. And you're going from 3 to 18, 10 being average. So that might sound familiar. A lot of other rule sets use that as well, but they only have the 4 attributes. From those 4 attributes, you derive a few other things like your speed, but not really very many others. 2, physical appearance. So that's for your reaction modifier, very minor. 3, wealth and status. So again, in most campaigns, your wealth level will be more narrative than anything, and your status may be important if you're playing a political game. You know, the king being up at 9.9 status, the queen at 9.8 status, and rolling down on the line. But many campaigns, that's more narrative than it is mechanical as well. 4, advantages. So these are slight quirks to the rules that you can make for your specific characters, much like qualities or feats in other rule sets. Again, they each cost a specific point total, so they're highly variable. 5, disadvantages. The exact opposite of a feat. So this is if you want to play someone who's really old, really young, who only has one eye, one leg, who can't read, someone who in some way is deficient from the person in the prime of their life. And that gives you points back to spend in other areas. 6, quirks. So any advantage or disadvantage that's really minimal, you can call that a quirk. Mark that off. 7 is skills. Skills are pretty much all either based on your dex or your IQ. And depending on what your dex or your IQ is, that will make each rank more or less expensive. Basically, it's very cheap to buy up to your physical potential. So if your strength is 14, it's or your dexterity rather, if your dexterity is 14, very easy to get a dex-based skill up to 14, but once you start surpassing your physical capabilities, it's harder to learn how to do that, to push past your physical limitations, and so it costs more points. If you want to have a 20 in shooting and is based on dex, your dex is only 14, you'll be paying a lot of points to get it up that high. Which I really like. It's very intuitive. It models the real world. And a lot of GURPS does model the real world. And when you're making your skill test, again, it'll range from 3 to 18. You can get it up to 20, but it's recommended you ask GM permission above 18. And you roll 3d6 against whatever your stat is. So if it's against your health and your health is 12, you got to roll 12 or under. If it's against agility and your agility is 16, you got to roll 16 or under. And you're rolling 3d6. So that creates a very steep bell curve. Most rolls will be in the 9, 10, 11 range. As you get further away from the middle, you're less and less likely to actually hit that roll. And this means that it's almost inefficient to become a real expert, to get an 18, because you'll almost never roll an 18. A 17 and an 18 are very similar in terms of what you're likely to roll. Whereas a 16 and a 14, it's like you might actually roll those fairly often. So the points may be better spent in that area. But that's kind of metagaming. but it does almost encourage you to take a middle path and diversify to make a more well-rounded and realistic character, which I really appreciate. 8, equipment and encumbrance. So in this book, they've got your medieval suite of weapons and armor, mail, plate armor, axes, swords, spears, bows, but they also have things like needle guns, Gauss rifles, laser guns, modern weapons, shotgun, sniper rifle, automatic weapon. They've got force field belts, futuristic armor, stormtrooper style armor, as well as all the modern armor. So very good equipment selection list. They don't have a lot of other gimmicks like cameras, motion trackers, holograms, potions, poultices. Really don't have any of that here in this core book. So all of that kind of stuff is going to need to be homebrewed or find a splat book. And there's a million splat books for GURPS. 9, completing your characters. So this is role-playing advice. It's not bad, but they only give you 2 pages of it here. 10, character development. So this is how to integrate the rules with the role-playing. And it's all right. It's, again, only 2 pages on that as well. So it probably could be more and better. But they do make the attempt, which I appreciate. 11, random characters. If you want to randomly roll characters into existence, you can do that, and they tell you how in Chapter 11. 12, success rolls. So they go through the basic rule set there. They talk about, as I said, rolling at or under your skill. They talk about sense rolls. Because they don't have a perception skill, you have to roll just against your IQ. You may have a few modifiers. In some ways that makes sense, because learning to be more perceptive can be indeed difficult. In other ways, it's something players aren't used to. Most rule sets allow you to improve your perception as you go along. So something a little bit different there. And it's a very commonly used skill, obviously, it's that perception rule. 13 is basic combat. Now, the combat can be a little bit clunky with GURPS. Even the basic combat, and that's what we've been using, can be slow. No step is complicated necessarily, but there are a lot of exceptions to different rules, and there are a fair number of steps involved. So generally you'd be rolling like you're shooting against your opponent. They are allowed to dodge. Very hard to dodge a bullet or a laser, but they get the attempt. If you hit, then you roll damage. The damage determined by your weapon. That damage is compared to if they have any armor, and then it's deducted from their health. Once you hit 0, you start making saves to stay awake. Once you get into the negative of your original health score, you start making saves to not die. So that's the very basic combat mechanic. Depending on your strength, for melee, you'll have what's called your swing damage and your thrust damage. So that's basically, are you throwing a jab, or using a spear, a thrusting implement, or are you applying leverage? Are you coming down with a hammer fist, or using an axe, or something like that? And that'll usually give you a little bit more damage on that kind of weapon. The basic combat, as I said, there's a lot of little exceptions. Axes take a turn to ready before you swing, for example. War picks can get stuck in your opponent's body when you damage them, for example. Flails can ignore your opponent's shield, for example. So there's a lot of little rules that you need to keep track of, little exceptions to things up and down, which can slow the game down, can cause confusion. And on the shooting side, as far as guns go, any modern or future weapon is going to have a rate of fire. We were using laser weapons in our game, Cyberpunk game, because the auto fire rules for machine guns and assault rifles is very slow. Basically, for every group of like 4 bullets, you have to make a separate attack roll. And that can be a lot of rolls in a turn. So we decided no automatic weapons. I don't want to have to roll 10 times every turn. we're going to use lasers. Now, even with the lasers, the rate of fire is like 4 or 3 on a rifle, I believe. So you're still making 3 or 4 attack rolls per turn, 3 or 4 damage rolls per turn. Your opponent's having to mark down 3 or 4 times his armor versus damage, adjusting hit points. So I found that a little clunky. It's just slow. And that's the main reason I wanted to re-record my review. It's because I didn't realize it would be that slow, but it has been quite slow, and that's using the basic system. Chapter 14 is the advanced system. It gets unbelievably complicated, hugely complex, crunchy, beyond the dreams of the Cookie Monster. Captain Crunch will be happy to see GURPS being wheeled out if you're using the advanced rules. They have all kinds of things like hit location and called shots and different maneuvers. And basic combat has a few maneuvers, but the advanced maneuvers are extremely complex to implement. So we pretty much skipped through that at a glance, knowing it was not for us. But even the basic, as I said, has been running a lot slower than we thought that it would. Chapter 15, injuries, illness, fatigue. So I kind of mentioned that when I was discussing the basic combat, just how that works. 16, mounted and vehicle combat. This is the other reason I wanted to re-record the review. In my first review, I noted they have a chapter on it, which is good. A lot of rule sets don't, and they do have a chapter on it. However, after using the rules, for 5 different vehicle encounters, it's not very detailed, and it can be a little clunky. And the way it's laid out in the book, it's hard to find exactly what you're looking for. So I was really excited to try and use it, but ultimately I don't think I would use it again for vehicle combat. Now there is a splat book devoted entirely to vehicles, but I'm just reviewing the core book here. So in vehicle combat, you attack, assault, offend against the opposing vehicle. They make a drive test to evade this attack or assault if they're able to, and then you roll on vehicular damage table. And that table is very hard to read. It's poorly formatted. It's short. There's not a lot of options on it. And that's pretty much all they have for the vehicular combat rules. There are no rules for losing control of your vehicle. And there's not a lot of depth and complexity in that. So that's why I can't recommend it, excuse me. Chapter 17, flight, the vehicle rules in 3 dimensions. And again, there's not a lot of detail there either. 18, animals, so they do give you a very small beastiary. I think it has like a wolf, a bear, an elephant, a horse, and not much else. There may be a few other things, but not much else. I would definitely not say it's enough of a beastiary to run a campaign with. You could design one-shots around this beastiary, but certainly not a campaign. So that's a major blow to the rule set, in my opinion. Again, there are splat books. You can find bestiaries, but the core book doesn't have enough for you to work with. Chapter 19 is magic. We're not using magic in our cyberpunk game, so I can't speak to that very well. The spell list looked quite small to me, but I haven't explored it in detail. So maybe someday I'll do review number 3. In more likelihood, I won't be using GURPS again. Although we have had a good time with GURPS, it's just the flaws compared to other products available, such as GURPS 4th edition. This is the 3rd edition. 4th is better, but I don't think we'll be using 3rd again. 20, psionics. This is something we have been using in our cyberpunk game quite a bit. So they've got it broken down into telekinesis, telepathy, and extrasensory perception. They also include teleportation and healing, which we have done away with. We don't need those. We're a little grittier than that, at least, despite having psionic powers. The telepathy power, basically you make a test and they have no defense. There are a few small things that they can do to gain some defense, but they're very expensive in terms of point cost. Unprepared mind is your playground if you are a psychic individual. Trying to break another psychic, that can be difficult, again, if they're prepared. And they're more likely to be prepared, fortunately. The telekinesis works just fine. There are rules for modifying people's memories, taking over their bodies. ESP has some rules for seeing into the future, detecting other psychics around. In general, the psychic powers are very powerful because there's very few defenses against them. So if that's what you're looking for, very lethal, very powerful psychic abilities, GURPS 3rd edition has those in abundance. What it doesn't have is a side detection for anyone out of the visual spectrum. So if I see you, I can read your mind. It does not have a rule for finding a person that I'm not looking directly at. And nor does it say you cannot do that. So it should have either this rule or it should say that explicitly this rule does not exist. Again, I'm sure there's a psionics splat book that clarifies this, that has greater depth, but the core book, we found that to be slightly problematic. We had to come up with some homebrew rules for that. 21, game mastering. Very much your average game mastering section. The bare bones, the basics only. 15 pages or so devoted to it. Not much to say there. 22, game worlds. So they go through their tech levels, different laws and customs you can have, different economic situations you can have. Anyone that has included a game world section in their book will probably cover these same bases. Now, a lot of books don't have it. So they do have it. That's good. But it is very average for what it is. 23, writing your own adventures. Very average advice there. They only devote 4 pages to it. You don't get a lot out of 4 pages. Then they go on to charts and tables and sample adventure, which is not very good. And then the appendix and the glossary. And that's it. That is GURPS 3rd edition. So what do you get out of this system? Huge versatility, variety in making any character you want. Their skill list is very long. There's something like 100 different skills to choose from, probably about 100 different advantages to choose from, and maybe like 50 disadvantages. Like huge versatility. You can make any character. You could make someone who's 10 years old, 100 years old, 50 years old, 25, 75. You could make a soldier, a farmer, a physician, a physicist, a psychiatrist. You could make pretty much any character you want. That's the strength of GURPS. You can do whatever you want to do with it in a great deal of detail. And it runs. That's what I'll say about the rule set and functionality. It runs. It can be made to work. A lot of rule sets, you can't say that about. They're clunky, they fall apart, they don't work at certain points. This one does. What are the drawbacks? It barely works. There are many different steps involved in combat, and they're not always the same steps, depending on how you're armed and armored, depending on how your opponent is armed and armored. So there's a certain crunch factor there. As I said, you're using a machine gun, have fun rolling the dice 15 times. Your opponent will have to roll 15 times to dodge you, then roll damage however many times you hit. Assuming 50-50, that's 7 damage rolls, 7 adjustments for armor, and 7 adjustments for hit points. I don't want to do that every turn. I want it much, much faster than that. That's why I've done this re-review. Because even with lasers, we pick lasers because they're not that bad, is 4 attack rolls, 4 dodge rolls, 4 damage rolls, 4 adjustments every single turn. That's pretty much unacceptable for us. and the vehicular combat has also let us down in a similar way. But it works. It just works a little bit slower than I would like it to, than my group would like it to. If you're playing Pathfinder, you know, this will be a huge step up, and lightning speed will come into your game. You only have to make 20 rolls a turn. It's amazing speed compared to Pathfinder. But compared to other rule sets available on the market, Savage Worlds, BRP, D6 system, I think it's a little bit slow. So overall, very, very strong rule set, especially on the bell curve of what else is out there. It comes in very close to the top of the list. So I would definitely recommend trying out GURPS, especially examining the character creation. And we have had a lot of fun. And if fun is your goal, it has not let us down at all in that respect. Whereas other rule sets have visibly, physically sapped the fun out of the game. And GURPS did not do that. It's there. It might not always add, but it rarely subtracts. So that's my re-review of GURPS 3rd edition. Until I see you again, good day and good gaming.